Imagine a signal traveling from the most intricate network of nerves in the human body to the farthest reaches of the brain. A signal that transforms touch into sensation and sensation into profound experience. Today, we turn our curiosity toward one of the most intimate and fascinating aspects of human biology, the female orgasm, understood not as a mystery or a myth, but as a remarkable orchestration of anatomy, physiology, and perception. Disclaimer: this discussion is intended for educational purposes, providing general information about human anatomy and biology. It is not a substitute for medical advice. Individuals with concerns about sexual or reproductive health should consult qualified healthcare professionals. At the center of understanding female sexual response lies the clitoris, an organ that, despite its relatively small external appearance, represents one of the most sophisticated concentrations of nerve endings in the human body, a structure whose significance extends far beyond what is visible, offering a profound example of how anatomy and function are inseparably intertwined, and whose study invites both scientific curiosity and a deeper appreciation of the human experience. For the clitoris is not merely an isolated organ but part of a complex system that includes internal extensions that envelop the vaginal canal, connecting superficial sensitivity with internal structures in a way that is unique to the female body. And this internal network, often invisible even to the careful observer, demonstrates that the external appearance alone can never fully convey the functional richness of biological design, reminding us that much of human anatomy operates quietly beneath the surface, yet is capable of remarkable complex fibers, vascular structures, and connective tissues can create a system of extraordinary responsiveness, which in turn reflects broader truths about the human body, that complexity and function are often hidden from view, waiting to be discovered through careful observation, research, and reflection. And in studying the clitoris, we also encounter a broader lesson about human biology, that the interplay between structure and sensation, between anatomy and subjective experience, is a central feature of our species, that understanding these connections not only informs medical and health education but also fosters a deeper appreciation for the subtleties of human physiology and the ways in which our bodies are designed to perceive, respond, and experience. And through this lens, the clitoris becomes not just an organ of sexual function, but a symbol of the intricate, interconnected, and deeply adaptive nature of the human body, inviting both scientific exploration and respectful contemplation, and reminding us that the experience of sexual arousal in the female body is deeply intertwined with the dynamics of blood flow, which orchestrates a series of subtle but profound physiological changes that transform ordinary tissue into a responsive, sensitive system. And this process begins with the nervous system sending signals that prompt blood vessels to dilate, allowing a greater volume of blood to enter the genital region. And as this increased circulation reaches the clitoris, the labia, and surrounding tissues, the resulting engorgement heightens sensitivity, making even gentle touch perceptible. And at the same time, lubrication occurs as a natural biological response, produced by specialized glands and tissues, which reduces friction and supports comfort. And these changes are not random but carefully coordinated, reflecting the interaction of the autonomic nervous system, vascular elasticity, and local tissue responsiveness. And as blood fills the spongy tissue of the clitoris, its glands becomes more pronounced. Its estrogen promotes vascular dilation and tissue health, while testosterone contributes to nerve sensitivity and responsiveness, and together these hormones prime the body for optimal circulation and sensation. And as blood flow increases, the internal tissues of the clitoris and vaginal vestibule expand, pressing against surrounding muscles and connective tissue, which in turn stimulates mechanoreceptors, specialized sensory cells that convert mechanical pressure into neural signals, amplifying perception and reinforcing the feedback loop between the body and brain. And the rhythmic nature of blood flow, which can fluctuate with heart rate, breathing, and tension in the pelvic muscles, adds a layer of dynamic variation, demonstrating that sexual response is not static but an ever-changing interplay of cardiovascular, neural, and muscular systems. And this explains why different forms of stimulation can feel different depending on timing, pressure, or emotional state, because the body's vascular and nervous systems are. The brain is the central orchestrator of female sexual response, a conductor of signals, emotions, and physiological processes, demonstrating that sexual experience is as much a matter of neural integration as it is of anatomy or vascular changes. And when sensory input from the clitoris, labia, and vaginal tissues reaches the spinal cord, it is transmitted upward to the brain, where it is interpreted, modulated, and integrated with cognitive, emotional, and memory systems, which illustrates that sensation is never purely mechanical but always entwined with perception, context, and psychological state, and these signals travel along a network of specialized somatosensory pathways that are capable of conveying precise information about location, pressure, vibration, and rhythm, while simultaneously interacting with autonomic centers that regulate heart rate, respiration, and blood flow, creating a seamless feedback loop between body and mind. And in this system, the brain does not simply respond to input passively but actively shapes the experience by amplifying certain sensations, modulating intensity, and integrating emotional and cognitive factors, which explains why two individuals can experience similar physical stimulation in dramatically different ways, and even the same individual may perceive variation depending on context, attention, mood, or prior experiences. And this dynamic interplay reflects the inseparability of mind and body, emphasizing that sexual response is a holistic phenomenon where physical, emotional, and cognitive components converge to create the lived experience of arousal and pleasure. And as these neural signals ascend to regions of the brain associated with reward, motivation, and emotion, including the limbic system, they interact with circuits that regulate dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins. Interoception, or awareness of internal bodily states, plays a role in translating visceral signals from engorged tissues and rhythmic muscle contractions into conscious perception, which gives rise to the subtle sense of internal awareness that often accompanies arousal. And this interoceptive feedback allows the brain to monitor the body's state, adjust responses, and create a coherent experience of sensation that feels embodied and immediate. And the hypothalamus coordinates autonomic and hormonal responses, influencing blood flow, lubrication, and muscle tone, linking physical changes with neural and emotional processes, while the amygdala contributes to emotional salience, detecting safety, comfort, or threat, which can enhance or inhibit arousal depending on context. And this demonstrates that the brain continuously evaluates the environment, internal state, and prior experience, creating a complex matrix in which sexual response emerges not as a simple chain reaction but as an adaptive, context-sensitive process, a signaling, while relaxation, emotional safety, and focus facilitate the flow of sensory information, enhancing the responsiveness of the clitoris and pelvic tissues, and these effects illustrate the inseparability of psychology and physiology, showing that the quality of experience depends on both the external stimulus and the internal neural landscape. And as signals are integrated across multiple brain regions, the perception of pleasure becomes both localized and holistic, encompassing specific sensations in the genital area while simultaneously engaging broader networks associated with emotion, reward, and self-awareness. And this engagement underscores that orgasm is not merely a mechanical event but a complex experience involving widespread neural coordination, which explains why individual variation is natural and why no single pattern can define universal experience. And the descending pathways from the brain to the spinal cord also modulate reflexes and muscular contractions, guiding the rhythmic pelvic flow. The pelvic muscles are among the most overlooked yet profoundly influential contributors to female sexual response, forming a network of support that shapes sensation, organ function, and the physical expression of pleasure. And these muscles, which include the pelvic floor and associated deep stabilizing structures, create a dynamic environment in which internal organs such as the uterus, vagina, and clitoris are held in alignment and allowed to respond optimally to stimulation. And while often considered in the context of posture or continence, these muscles also contract rhythmically during sexual arousal and orgasm, generating pulses and pressure that enhance the perception of sensation, amplify the signals traveling from the clitoris and vaginal walls to the spinal cord, and create a sense of fullness, tension, and release that is intimately tied to subjective experience. And this muscular involvement is inseparable from the nervous system, as sensory feedback from mechanoreceptors embedded in the muscleestrogen play a critical role in maintaining tissue elasticity, vascular dilation, and lubrication, ensuring that the tissues of the genital area remain supple and responsive, while progesterone, testosterone, and other androgens influence nerve sensitivity, muscle tone, and the intensity of physiological response. And the cyclical fluctuations of these hormones across the menstrual cycle, during pregnancy, postpartum, and through menopause, illustrate how hormonal context shapes the responsiveness of the pelvic muscles and associated tissues, and this demonstrates that sexual response is never purely mechanical but is always embedded in the dynamic hormonal milieu of the body. and hormonal signals also influence the brain, modulating perception, motivation, and the reward systems involved in sexual experience, showing that endocrine function is a bridge between physiology and subjective experience, and when hormone levels are optimal, pelvic muscles contract with greater coordination and sensitivity. Vascular responsignaling is reinforced, creating conditions in which arousal and orgasm are more likely to be perceived as intense and satisfying, and conversely, variations in hormonal balance, whether due to age, medical conditions, stress, or medication, can alter the responsiveness of these muscles, the sensitivity of the clitoris and vaginal walls, and the integration of neural signals, which helps explain why sexual experience can vary from day to day or across life stages. And the pelvic floor itself is composed of layers of muscle, connective tissue, and fascia, all of which interact with one another to support the movement, shape, and tension of pelvic organs. And during arousal, these layers coordinate subtly, contracting in response to both reflexive and voluntary cues, adjusting pressure and stiffness to optimize sensation. And the rhythmic contraction of the pelvic floor during orgasm is itself a form of communication between muscles, nerves, and the brain, creating a cycle in which tension builds. Feedback signals are signaling operate as partners in an intricate, adaptive, and deeply responsive system. And appreciating this complexity allows us to recognize how bodily health, hormonal balance, and neuromuscular conditioning all contribute to sexual experience, and how variability in these factors is natural and expected, reminding us that the body's capacity for sensation and response is both extraordinary and deeply personal, and that attention to these systems enhances not only sexual well-being but overall physiological and emotional health, revealing the profound interconnectedness of muscles, hormones, nerves, and mind in shaping the lived experience of female arousal and orgasm. Variation in female sexual response is not only expected but fundamental to understanding human biology, and it illustrates how anatomy, physiology, psychology, and experience converge to create deeply personal patterns of sensation, arousal, and orgasm. And no two individuals respond in exactly the same way, reflecting differences in nerve density, tissue structure, hormonal balance, vascular responsiveness, and muscular coordination. And even within a single person, responsiveness may fluctuate over time due to factors such as fatigue, stress, emotional state, hormonal cycles, or physical health, which demonstrates that sexual response is a dynamic process, influenced by an ever-changing constellation of internal and external conditions, and this variation highlights a critical principle. Human biology is adaptive, and the nervous system, vascular system, endocrine system, and musculoskeletal system do not operate in isolation, but in constant dialogue with each other. Modulating sensitivity, perception, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, and other signaling molecules fluctuate between individuals, across life stages, and within cycles, altering blood flow, nerve sensitivity, lubrication, and muscular tone, which in turn affects how the body experiences arousal and orgasm. And these shifts illustrate that sexual response is not fixed, but continuously responsive to the internal chemical environment of the body, demonstrating the flexibility and adaptability of human physiology. And psychological and emotional factors also contribute meaningfully to variation, as the brain interprets incoming sensory signals in the context of attention, expectation, mood, memory, and emotional safety, which explains why the same physical stimulation can feel entirely different depending on context, prior experience, or emotional state. And these interactions between mind and body highlight that sexual experience is not a purely mechanical process, but a highly integrative phenomenon that combines anatomy, physiology, neurochemistry, and psychology into a coherent experience. That signaling and hormonal modulation occurring at slightly different rates, amplitudes, or patterns in each person, creating a diversity of experiences that is both normal and expected. And this diversity underscores the importance of understanding anatomy and physiology without rigid expectations or comparisons, allowing each person to appreciate their own responses and patterns as valid and healthy. And recognizing variation encourages compassionate awareness of oneself and others, reducing anxiety, shame, or pressure that might arise from misconceptions. And from a clinical perspective, this variability is acknowledged as part of normal sexual health, where differences in sensitivity, arousal, or orgasmic experience are not inherently pathological, and interventions or guidance are provided when desired to enhance well-being rather than to impose arbitrary standards. And as we reflect on this, we see that the human body is an adaptive system, capable of responding to stimuli in countless ways, and that each person's signaling and cognitive and emotional context. And this perspective reinforces that the study of female sexual response is not about enforcing uniformity but about appreciating diversity, understanding the underlying biology, and recognizing that every experience is shaped by the interplay of structure, function, perception, and circumstance. And embracing this natural variation allows us to cultivate a richer, more nuanced understanding of sexual health, highlighting the extraordinary adaptability of the female body, and acknowledging that no single pattern defines normalcy, that pleasure, sensation, and orgasm exist along a spectrum shaped by anatomy, physiology, hormones, muscles, nerves, and mind, and that this spectrum is as varied, dynamic, and uniquely human as the individuals who inhabit it.